Hello and welcome to this International Conference on Men's Issues 2020 interview with your hosts, me, Elizabeth Hobson of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them, and X-man from NCFM Chicago chapter. Today we are interviewing the lovely Brian Lee Martinez of Honey Badger Radio. How you doing, Brian?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for asking.
And can you tell us a bit about what you've been up to at Honey Badger Radio recently?
Sure. Well, at Honey Badger Radio, I'm always trying to find new ways to make the shows interesting. My ultimate goal with HBR, at least within my ability to do so, is to reach more people, is to broaden the audience and get more people to listen to the content, because I think that it has to be a ground up movement. This has to come from individual people that start to care about these issues. Even if they don't agree with us on everything, I invite them to be a part of the conversation. And yeah, so I'm always trying to find new ways to do that. So I guess the two main things that I have been doing lately is trying to get more and more guests on the show that are not men's rights activists. They could be feminists. I've invited feminists many times. Very few have actually come on, but I keep trying. And then usually the ones I get on, by the way, I manage to give them a lot of additional perspective, even a change of heart in some ways. I get on sort of political pundit types that just do political content, or conservative figures. And because I find that, if I can talk to people who typically we would argue with or disagree with, I might be able to get them to see my point of view, even in a small way. And then maybe later, after, many months, they may come to those conclusions, give themselves credit for it, and not realize that I'm the one responsible for that. So I try to bring on different kinds of guests. I've been very fortunate. I've had an opportunity to have Stefan Molyneux of Freedom Aid Radio on my show, Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson of The Fallen State and the Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson Show, Sheriff David Clark, the sheriff from Wisconsin, who has made multiple appearances on CNN and Fox News, and other sort of prominent members. And I feel very fortunate for that. And yeah, so that's what I do on my fireside chat. It's all about, reaching out to people who, normally wouldn't watch our content, and then maybe just giving them a little bit of a taste of the red pill, or talking about these kinds of issues with people who are more culturally involved, whether they are, maybe they make videos about film and comic books and TV shows, and they think, oh, something's going on here. Things have gotten really feminist. I don't, why is this? And I'll bring them on and say, I'll tell you why this is happening. And then we'll talk about it. And, they sort of walk away with a new, some new ideas in their head. And in addition, I've also added a new series called Brian's Badger Lodge, which I do every other Friday, which is a call-in show where it's only men. So I host it. There are no female badgers on, and men call in and we discuss a given topic. Recently, I read through a book by a gentleman named Jack Donovan, and it talks about the masculine virtues. And so in every episode, I talked about one of those masculine virtues: strength. I believe it's, strength, courage, mastery, and honor. And so I'll read the chapter, I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts, and then bring on a caller to sort of talk about their thoughts, because I think that we need more spaces where men can be men around each other, completely unobserved, unpoliced by women, and discuss not just men's issues in the sort of rights sense that we typically discuss, or the sort of legal administrative sense, but the more social, cultural, and philosophical sense. Getting reconnected with masculinity, being unapologetically masculine in whatever way that expresses itself, and I think that I've enjoyed a lot of success with those two shows in particular. Of course, I still do lots of other shows where we discuss, content online, whether it's videos by feminists or articles or academic studies, or if we just talk about the news. And yeah, so those are some of the things I've been doing with Honey Badger Radio.
So not very busy then.
No, I got nothing going on. That's why I'm here. I was able to make time for this.
Is that Jack Donovan book, The Way of Men?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's right. The Way of Men.
I've got that on my bookshelf and I'm looking forward to it.
It's a really easy read. It's not much to it, so you should be able to get through it pretty fast.
Yeah.
I'll try to order it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely check it out. I'm actually going to try and get Jack Donovan on as a guest in the Fireside Chat. So I don't think it'll be too much of a problem.
Excellent, excellent. Have you read Iron John by Robert Bly as well?
No, not yet.
That's a good one. It's a little denser, I suspect, but but it's a good read.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing some work on Aristotelian stuff, more Aristotle. I want to talk about the heroic virtues. The conversation about what a hero is has been popping up everywhere, and men in particular are trying to get a better understanding of what it means to be a hero and why that is a kind of uniquely masculine pursuit. And what's interesting about that is it kind of exists in contrast to some other men's rights activist talking points, because they usually sort of recommend or go away from it. But I find that we should at least understand it. And I think that there are plenty of men that still would like to find ways to pursue that without necessarily making selfless sacrifices.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, the political angle is that, you know, and it's a social angle too, is that men shouldn't be forced into that role. It should be a decision that they freely make, and, you know, they can become a hero in a sphere that is of interest to them.
Yes, you can't conscript a hero. If they don't choose the path, if they don't make the choice, it's like forcing someone to do something that you think is good. You can't then call them good for having done it because you forced them. But if you give them the choice and they choose to do good, then they deserve the credit. The choice is everything. And I think that men want to feel as though when they do good, they have chosen to do that, especially if they understand what that is. At least that's what I have observed.
Could I chime in about heroes, about the topic of heroes? Because I recognize as a lot of people point out, a lot of superheroes, not just heroes, but superheroes in these comic books are generally male. And do you think that plays a role? Because my interpretation of that was that the reason was because men are almost expected to be like these superheroes on a daily basis. Like, they're not expected to fly, obviously, right? But they're expected to, you know, rescue people from danger. And they're almost like, they're always told like this is their destiny. They should do this. You think like a lot of men like probably relate to that because they feel like this is what they have to deal with every day. Like, everybody expects them to just save. They just expects them to do things and step up in a line of danger, you know? And
yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. It's even older than superheroes. You can go back to the earliest stories of self-sacrifice for the greater good, and they will always involve a man. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that women can't do it, but in general, it is the space that the reason why we told the stories involving men was because we were kind of telling them, this is the kind of thing we expect from you. And if you do these things, we will think of you in the highest terms, right? If you want to be remembered in epic poems like Beowulf, then you will behave in this way. And it's a way of living forever. And it's like what men, I think that men, if they don't feel like they can do it, they do romanticize about it. They find it to be a very appealing thing. And so I think that the sort of superhero thing that you're talking about, it's sort of just the modern incarnation of those stories told over and over that reinforce those ideas. And without getting too like off on this tangent, there is a narrative about women as well. And I think that it's gotten lost because the way we tell stories now, essentially what they do is they just take women and put them in the male story, and they just swap the genders, but nothing else changes. And you find that what often happens is you have a character that men and women can't really relate to, but they kind of force themselves to do so. But there is I guess the hero story for men is not an absolute, but it is something that men in general resonate with. And there is also a female version, and it's like a rule I learned. You know, I'm an artist, and when I took I remember when I took anatomy and life drawing classes, I would try to sort of put my own spin on my style into what I was drawing. And our instructor, and all of my classmates would do that too. And the teacher had this saying, you know, he would say, you cannot bend the rules unless you know the rules. So that you must know the rules, and then you can bend the rules. And when you know the rules and bend the rules, it actually is a lot more natural. It makes more sense. And so I think in terms of the way in which we visualize heroes in our stories, we have forgotten what the rules are. So when they get bent, it's all completely out of whack, and none of it really makes sense. And people are kind of, you know, they want to be entertained, so they kind of force themselves to enjoy it, but there's always something in their head saying something about this doesn't make sense. And it's really because it's being used as a tool to sort of push an idea that gender isn't real and that men and women are interchangeable, and there isn't something that is essentially masculine or essentially feminine. And while it might sound like I'm making the argument that men have a role they need to fill and women have a role they need to fill, I'm not. What I'm saying is, if men choose that they want to live a certain life that happens to coincide with an expected path, and women do the same, I think they should have every right to do that. And I think there is something natural and appealing for it. And if it just so happens that most men go down that road and most women go down the road that is typically set out for them, I think that is just a natural outcome. And there will always be outliers. You'll always have, you know, your occasional Amelia Earharts, or your occasional Isaac Newtons, but in general, you know, that's probably going to fall in the way that it does. And I don't think we should discourage that, because I don't believe we should be socially constructing people, as it were.
No, absolutely. I don't think it's efficient, and I don't think it's moral. You know,
yes.
I don't think that we are happy when we are pushed off the natural course. And, you know, I suppose with all this talk of heroes, you know, what I'm thinking of is about archetypes. And so there's a great paper by Martin Seeger and John Barry, and were there a few other authors? I can't remember now, but it's from the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health. And they so they say that the idea that, you know, of the blank slate theory is a political fashion, not a scientific theory, and that we need to view masculinity in particular as being based on archetypes rather than stereotypes, because stereotypes can be fixed. You know, if they're not right, we can fix men. Men are too stoic, let's fix that, you know. Whereas archetypes are much deeper in us, you know, and we know they are because they are across cultures, like you said earlier. You know, we see the same patterns and characters and journeys cropping up throughout the religious texts, throughout the folk stories, throughout modern kind of, you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all of that. You know, it's all the same stuff over and over again, and it begs the question, why won't we just accept it and meet men where they are? And, you know, like you say, there is always going to be outliers, and everybody should be free to outlie as far as they want, but we do need to accept that stereotypes are kind of generally based on something pretty
true. There is, yeah, exactly. It's like the outliers can be admirable for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Marie Curie, admirable, right? But we don't want to try to make the outliers into the norm by forcing people to act in ways that they just don't find in their nature. So allowing people to be free is the best course of action, but you have to be okay with the consequence of that freedom, which might be that people will probably gravitate towards their archetypes, and they find the archetypes attractive. This is why these stories are, the stories that last forever are the ones that just lean into the archetypes. The ones that are fleeting or that we forget about or that we find troubling are the ones that try too hard to do the opposite of that or undermine that or subvert that. It just doesn't have the staying power. People will look back on that and say, I don't understand what is happening here.
It's almost ironic, you know, we hear a lot about like how we feel like we're trying to get rid of these social constructs about traditional femininity and traditional masculinity, and it looks like now we're just forcing another construct. Like
we are.
Like we just went from one construct to the other. I mean, it doesn't look like it really helped per se.
Yeah, it's funny that the idea that something is a social construct makes it moot when feminism itself is a social construct. So it's like, if you see the things that you dislike, which are clearly not social constructs, but they are the product of many, many years of evolution, most of which was sexual selection. So most of what the world is today, the world of men and women is today, is something that women have created. They have sexually selected for it. They have raised children to value certain things in women and value things in their own masculine nature and in the girls that they raise, to say this is what you want in a man. And over like countless generations, we are here, and you can go into any country anywhere in the world with very few exceptions and find that women in those countries in general want the same things from men, and men want to give the same things to women. And so that this is the idea that it's a social contract is obviously bunk, but it's hilarious because it is something that women made, but feminism blames men for. And also feminism is a social construct, so.
And I can't help but notice above your shoulder, Rosie the Riveter there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
What are you doing there?
What? You know, I get this sometimes when Rosie is in the picture and I'm doing an interview. I remember I interviewed Deanna Lorraine, who was the Red Pill dating coach. Now she works at InfoWars, which is surreal. And she said, what are you doing with Rosie the Riveter? Like, she thought I was like, are you a feminist? Are you still holding on to these ideas? I'll tell you the reason why. Rosie the Riveter is it's an example of feminists co-opting things that they didn't create and taking credit for those things. Rosie the Riveter is not a feminist symbol. It's been made one. It's been taken by feminism saying this is ours now, right? But the truth is it was never theirs. This is literally World War II propaganda asking women to take responsibility and do what they can to help their men who are fighting to free the world from fascism and Nazism and Japanese imperialism, okay? And this is women taking responsibility, the image, first of all. And feminism has absolutely nothing to do with that, because feminism is about the opposite of that, which is not taking responsibility for anything, blaming men for everything and asking them to give them stuff, okay? Secondly, the woman who was modeled for that painting, it's funny, after she did that, I think she only actually worked in the factories for about 2 months at the most, and then she stepped down and stopped doing that. So it's a little bit funny because it was a woman saying we can do it, but she actually couldn't because she ended up quitting shortly afterwards. But I still admire the imagery, and I don't consider it feminist imagery, despite the fact that that's what they do. Because if you look at the way in which the feminist movement operates, every time they take credit for a great thing a woman has done, that woman was not a feminist, but feminists say it's an example of their ideology in action. Marie Curie was not a feminist. There was not a movement pushing her to do what she did. She just decided, I'm going to do this thing because I want to, And whether or not she encountered resistance or, you know, I don't know, people like men, like the acting as gatekeepers to the profession, whether or not that happened is sort of irrelevant because she pushed past it and she did the work. And so this is not feminist behavior. Like, this is not an example of that. It's just sometimes there are women and sometimes there are men that go above and beyond and do something that, you know, regardless of whatever the social norms might be, regardless of what is expected of them, and they just behave in an abnormal way, and they get abnormal things done. And feminism wants to take claim for that, but they shouldn't, because that woman would, if you could get in a time machine and tell Amelia Earhart that what she is doing is because of feminism, she would laugh at you, because what she is doing is because she is doing it. She is an individual. And I think that that should apply no matter what. Like, I don't take personal credit for anything that a Latino man does, if it's a great deed anywhere in the world, because I had no impact on that, and he has no impact on me. It's just an individual that is extraordinary and doing an extraordinary thing. So that's basically my reasoning on why I have Rosie the Riveter literally next to Bruce Lee, which I know you can't see, but there's a Bruce Lee poster right next to it. And it's over here to the side. Here, maybe I'll give this a tilt so you can see that, yeah, Bruce Lee is right there. And that's a Labyrinth with David Bowie. So, you know, I'm kind of all over the spectrum, you could say. All the genders are represented.
And like that, you know, also to point out, you know, feminists, people forget about there was the early feminists were part of the White Feather campaign idea, which is where they were trying to get men to go to war. They weren't trying to get to go to war themselves. They were trying to get men to go to war, you know, so, to protect them. And that was their definition of female empowerment, getting men to do things, you know, not them actually saying, okay, well, as a woman, we want to go to war. That was them saying, hey, we want the right to vote, like men do, but also not only do we not want to go to war, we're going to pressure men to making sure they go to war. If not, we're going to shame them for not going to war. So,
well, yeah, I mean, when the Women's Social and Political Union gave up their activism for the war effort and took on the White Feather campaign instead, you know, they were handing feathers not only to boys but also to working class men. Well, working class men didn't have the vote. Yeah.
Yep. And to injured and wounded veterans as well. They were really passing out to anybody almost as an immediate. People were wounded and couldn't join. They would pass it to them, you know, just to force them to join. It's crazy. Yeah, it's like how could Amelia Earhart be a representation of feminism? She was actually trying to do stuff as a woman. She wasn't trying to get men to do something for her.
Exactly. And you know, it's funny that, like, it seems like I do care a lot about this sort of symbolic stuff, because I think that okay, so settling the legal problems that men face and the political problems is absolutely crucial and important. But my belief is, if we don't change the culture, if we don't change people at the bottom level, at the grassroots, and get them to look at not just men, but men and women and the dynamic between them in a completely new way, where they actually acknowledge the ways in which not just that women can be bad, but that women have power, that women actually have tremendous power to affect the world and to affect men and to affect each other in the same way that we believe men have that power, and that men can occasionally be victims of women's behavior, and as well as seeing them as victims of other men's behavior. Because right now, when we look at a situation where a man is harmed by another man, we only see the man doing the harm. We don't necessarily see the man being harmed as a victim. It may be on an individual case, like if you knew someone who was harmed, you might have sympathy. But when you think about it, like if there's a suicide bomber man and he runs into a building and he blows up the building and it kills 30 men, we care about the suicide bomber, but we forget about the 30 male victims. And so we need to start seeing men as, you know, people who can be hurt, people who can hurt, and people who have tremendous power. And we should see women in the same way. And when we do that, the thing that I think is most interesting is women are, despite the fact that there's tremendous misandry in our media, in our academic spheres, online, in our culture in general, so much so that people don't generally see it, women are far more unhappy than men in general. And the reason for this, I believe, is that it's not as bad to feel like the world doesn't care about you when you're used to it, because you feel like your life has meaning outside of that. Like if you know that you have the power to be a really bad person, then you know what you need to do to be better, and you work at that, right? So as a man, you might know, well, look, as a man, you know, you're stronger than women, you can harm them, you should be careful, you should try to do best for them. And men want to please women, so they live that way, and they actually maybe like slightly less satisfied than they have been in previous decades, but they find that their life is more gratifying if they're doing what they think is right. Women are told that there is absolutely nothing that they need to do, and that they're perfect just the way they are, and they don't have any work to do, they don't have to work on themselves, and their actions have no meaning. So they're actually more depressed because they feel like they have nothing that they need to, they have no purpose, right?
Yeah.
To do good. Yeah, there's no path, exactly. They can just live however they like.
And I point out that after so many decades of feminism, womanhood has almost become like a brand or something you sell, less of an actual expression of your character, and almost more like a brand. I showed there was this like advertisement for when the Captain Marvel film was about to come out. There was an advertisement, and the first advertisement, it was kind of funny, but it literally just had the words women. The word woman.
Oh, it just said the word woman on it?
Yeah. Coming from the screen, and that was the advertisement for why you should buy the film. And it's like,
of course. Yeah, but that's true though, because that's the thing, like the way in which women are presented in our media. And this is the thing, like to some degree, one could argue that women face a kind of systemic discrimination, but it comes from feminism. It basically takes away their individuality. It makes them a part of a larger collective known as women. And any woman that is impacted in a positive way or a negative way, all women everywhere have to essentially embody that thing. So it makes women unhappy for this other reason as well. For example, if a woman is raped somewhere, then feminists tell all women that that woman is you, and you have to feel the way that she feels because she experienced this terrible thing, and you could experience it too at any point, and you should live in fear. If a woman is successful, like say, you know, oh, like we're gonna have, you know, the first female vice president, all women are supposed to be happy for her and think of themselves as becoming vice president. But they're not really going to become vice president. They're just going to be women that are sort of living vicariously through this other person, and ultimately it won't make them happy. It's going to make them empty because they aren't being told or asked. Nothing is being asked of them. So they're just sort of like, I'm on social media, I'm a woman. That's all they have. And it's really unfortunate, because if you told them, well, actually, ladies, you have a tremendous amount of power to affect men, to affect women, to affect your life, and your choices matter, and your agency matters, and being held responsible for your actions matters, those women could actually find a tremendous amount of meaning in their life, because all of a sudden they realize that if they stand up for someone on social media, it matters. If they do it for a boy, or if they decide that, you know, they want to start some kind of movement, you know, online, then it gives their life meaning, and they become responsible for people, and they become accountable, and it actually makes them more fulfilled. So anyway, I think this was a really long answer to a question that I've forgotten, but essentially I feel as though changing the culture from the bottom up is the way forward, because you want more people to feel as though their actions have meaning, and that if you tell them, well, look, here's half of the population, and many of these men are in pain, and you can help them. Because when women speak up on behalf of men, the world listens. And I think that women could take some solace in that knowledge.
Yeah. And just one last input. I was just going to address what you were saying. Yeah. When feminists say, you know, when they try to use the patriarchy theory to explain why men are getting hurt by saying, well, men control the media, men control the politics, I always remind them, it's not, politicians run, you know, they run campaigns and they run their country based off of the culture that they live in, not the other way around. They don't promote the culture. The culture tells them how to run and tells them what to do, how to run a campaign and what to do. You know, the media writes stories and movies based off of the culture that we live in, not the other way around.
Absolutely.
So changing the culture would definitely help as well.
Well, exactly, because people who work in entertainment, people who work in the media, who raises them? Women do. Where do they get their education? In academia. Who runs academia? Well, women do. I mean, men may be principals and deans, but the people who actually teach the ideas are overwhelmingly women, and overwhelmingly feminist women, by the way. And I think it's something like 85% in the United States of schools are basically feminist leaning. Like they don't necessarily put feminism in every class, but if you learn something like history, it's going to come from a feminist bias perspective. And so everyone's going to come out of academia ready to serve women. So just because there are men in Congress or in the White House or in the newsroom, that doesn't mean they aren't serving feminist interests or women's interests, because they absolutely are. I mean, they do what women ask them. If patriarchy was real, there would be no such thing as a feminist movement, because the patriarchy wouldn't allow it. So, and the funny thing too is, you know, I've learned that feminists always project. When they tell you what men's rights activists are doing, they're telling you what they are willing to do to you, because feminist solutions to problems, while they do go after the culture, mostly they operate in a top-down fashion. They use the state, they use academics to raise children. They have legitimately done most of the damage to minority communities, like we talked about in our interview with you, where you were talking about the unique ways that Black families suffer. And I would add that, you know, Latin and white and other kinds of families are right behind you in terms of what's happening. That is mostly a product of feminist-oriented policy. It may not be a woman signing the paper. It may have been a man, you know, who was president, like in the 60s, that basically said, oh, we need to expand the welfare state and we need to do these, you know, these things. But they did it on the grounds that they were operating in the interests of women, and feminists often had a very large hand in that. So if there is systemic oppression against Blacks, feminists are the ones responsible, because they do everything from the top down. They operate from authority. They do it through their teachers. They do it through the daycare. They do it through the welfare state. And they put people in these positions. And then through the culture, they tell them that all of the things that they're doing to them are the fault of men.
Absolutely. You know, and feminism is obviously just one of a whole host of social justice kind of movements that are really threatening our societies at the moment. Have you, you know, because you talk about various kind of issues on Honey Badger Radio, where do you place feminism? You're suggesting that it's kind of, it sounds to me like you're suggesting it's a bit of a hub. And maybe, you know, if we take feminism out, what do you think the impact will be on the rest of, you know, all these movements?
That's a great question. So I think of it like this, and I go back to Feminists Always Project. There's a very well-known and outspoken feminist around these days named Mona Alathawi. Do you know Mona Alathawi?
Yeah.
So I love Mona Alathawi because she is so brazen in her hatred that she always says the truth, what she really believes. And through that, I could interpret some other truths that she may not realize that she's putting out there. She made a video once where she explained how imperialism, capitalism, racism, Islamophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and all these other like isms and obias, right, are all the product of the patriarchy. And the patriarchy is like the head of an octopus, and all of the tentacles represent all these other forms of oppression, right? So it's sort of like the spoke, as you say, or the hub. Mm-hmm. And I believe that what she was really saying, because that doesn't surprise me at all. I believe that feminists, because leftism in general, and I apologize if there's any leftists watching, but this is the truth. Leftism in general operates under a model of there is an oppressor class and there are oppressed people. And this is where inequality comes from. It's not a product of just the fact that people are different. It's not a product of, how much effort one puts in or whatever. It's not a product of the Pareto principle. It's simply because all people would be the same if it weren't for oppressive factors, right? The patriarchy or the feminist model is the most effective model when it comes to sort of putting that out there. And the reason is, it is the most antithetical to what we actually believe. See, if you tried to make a class warfare argument, it won't stick for many people that are able to think for themselves in the United States at least, but I think across the board, because in general, people will say, well, wait a minute, I don't think the rich are evil because I would like to be among them someday, and that would make me evil at some point, and I don't like being poor, so this doesn't really make sense, and I reject the idea that, this is actually a premise. Other forms of oppression don't work as well in terms of like these sort of narratives, right? But what really works is telling men who love women that they actually hate women, or that there are men among them in their society that hate women and keep them down. Because what that does is it actually gives men a purpose, which is, okay, I know I don't hate women, but I've been told that there are other men who do, and that there are structures and systems that oppress them. So I need to help women because I love women and I want them to love me, and I want them to know that I'm not among the men who hate them. So I believe that the way that you beat feminism, everything else comes tumbling down after that. And the way you do that is through men's rights. So when you see men, regardless of class, regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of nationality, regardless of religion, regardless of whether or not they're feminists, which I would also put in with religion, regardless of those factors, as men, and you say, look, buddy, I know that you were in the KKK, or you were a male feminist and you see me this way, or you were part of Antifa or Black Lives Matter or this Islamist group, but I know that where you are now is a product of your suffering, and I want to help you with that. And I want you to know that you are a man and you are a human being and you deserve compassion and love and help. And I want to offer that help to you, right? And I want to bring you, because, maybe you're on a self-destructive path. I mean, when we talk about extremist men, we are talking about a very small percentage of the population. We're talking about a percentage that's so small that in studies, in sort of brain studies, they found that their phenotype is more different from normal men than homosexual men's phenotype is for normal men. So they're very different. Their brain is completely different. They're antisocial in a way that is unique, and it is a product of abuse, whether that was from a stepfather or a father or a mother, which, by the way, if it's the mother, that's the most common product of that, and that could take the form of negligence, that could take the form of them being victims of rape or incest. And so they are suffering because they dealt with an issue that we would consider a men's issue, especially because it doesn't get addressed, because people don't want to look at young boys and see them as rape victims. They just see them as, lucky. Or we don't want to look at boys as potential victims of incest, which does happen. And it's in particular happens in the Black community as well. And so when you acknowledge their humanity, you want to help them through their trauma, then you have to see them as men first, and that there are men in need of help. And I think that in order to do that, you have to tear down the patriarchy model of seeing the world. And once it falls, and I mean, I'm not saying this is going to be easy. I'm saying it's simple, like this is what needs to be done, but it won't be easy, okay? I think that when families are intact and fathers are back in the home, and the family unit to whatever degree it is, you know, I don't mean nuclear family, and I'm not making a tradcon argument here, but families are necessary. I don't think there's an alternative model that is more ideal than mother, father, children. Okay. So if you restore that to the capacity that it can be, with a man and a woman that are voluntarily together and they're working together to raise a strong family, you will find that no other kinds of class-oriented grievances will work on their kids, because they're too busy being part of a happy family to try to find something outside of that circle to blame for their problems. So there won't be, you can only form Antifa, the alt-right, the KKK, Black Lives Matter, and these other Islamist groups. You can only form those in broken families where there is abuse present, right? If you don't have that, then those things can't exist. And the fact is, feminism wants that strife. You know, they do. They want there to be an eternal war between men and women, black and white, gay and straight, and so on down the line. And if you restore the family unit, I'm telling you, that stuff will melt away to almost vanishing. Mm-hmm. But and the only way to do that is to acknowledge men's humanity, and that they are a positive force in the world, and that women have a responsibility that they should be glad to undertake to make that happen and work with men instead of fearing each other. That they have to recognize that, you know, that we're part of a whole. So.
Yeah, that was a good point you brought up about the political left, about the idea of there's an oppressive class and there's an oppressed class, you know, the way they operate. And I noticed very recently, around like 2013, 2014, the men's rights movement was getting a lot of traction on the internet due to a lot of female MRAs and male MRAs working together. And it was getting a lot of traction, and then it became an immediate like staple of hatred from the left, where the left like started. There's a lot of left-wing channels. I know the Young Turks started when they started trying to invite Karen Strawn on their interview, and they started trying to attack her. And then there's other progressive groups, you know, like Secular Talk and all that. And they started like antagonizing the men's rights movement like viciously. And it's what's interesting is that their antagonism, their defense for feminism, and their antagonism against the MRM is almost like a complete contradiction to everything else. To everything else they would talk about, because they've always held up this standard of like being this human rights like side where you have to join a side based on human rights principles, and yet on grassroots principles, and yet here they are using a corporate feminist group, promoting a corporate feminist group and fighting against the men's rights movement, you know.
Yeah.
Or they will make arguments about like how the belt against black on black crime, because it only addresses a small amount of people committing the crimes, you know, and it blames the entire community. But then they need to argue against MRAs. They'll say, well, male on male, it's male on male issues. Men are the ones the problem. And it seems like there's this complete contradiction in defense of feminism, that they almost have to contradict themselves and everything else they believe in to promote that.
Yeah, they have to find ways to not put men in a position of being worthy of compassion or sympathy, because it undermines the patriarchy argument, right? And the thing is, it's a religious belief. They have to maintain that the patriarchy is both God and the devil, and that it will always, it's ever present, it's everywhere. It's, you know, you can't touch it, you can't smell it, you can't see it, you can't, you know, hear it, but it exists, and it manifests in mysterious ways. And if they don't maintain that, then feminism starts to fall apart. And so whenever something happens that's a legitimate men's issue, they try to, this is why intersectionality is the big thing, right? With feminism now, it's intersectional feminism is the current form, where they basically, and this is what feminism always does, and it's the Rosie the Riveter, they co-opt other things and they say that it's theirs, because the feminism's number one goal is to maintain its own legitimacy, is to maintain its own relevance. It has to, it's a business, and business is good and has to stay in business forever, right? It has to. And the only way you can do that is if you use these leftist principles. You have to basically keep saying there's an oppressor, there's an oppressor. That's why Mona Alathawi says patriarchy is the head of the octopus and everything else is just a tentacle. Because the patriarchy cannot be beaten in their own like holy texts, as it were, right? So yeah, I mean, their whole thing is they have to maintain legitimacy. I'm reminded of there are some leftist MRAs, and I don't agree personally that these things are compatible, but I don't give them any guff for it. I'm friends with them. I say, you know what, maybe your way will work. I'm not gonna argue against it. But the case that I've heard them make, I know this one guy is a pretty far left MRA actually, and he made a video explaining why he believes the men's rights movement should be on the left. Like it's actually, that's where it should live. And his argument was that, in part at least, was that civil rights causes have traditionally been on the left, and this is like the reasoning behind it. But I differ on this for this one reason. I think this is important. That's why I'm bringing this up. If the men's movement's goal is not its own, if the men's rights movement goal is not to make itself completely irrelevant by solving all of its problems, I don't want to be a part of it, because then it becomes the same money-making machine that feminism is. Now, I don't think that it's entirely possible, because you would need to have such a deep well of love and sympathy for men that you won't question any grievance we make, whether it's about, oh, women don't want to date me, and they should be willing to date men no matter what we look like or how little effort we put into a relationship, which is all stuff feminists say about women, right? But I just don't want it to turn to a grift. And I think that in general, we should be fighting really hard for our irrelevance when the time comes. And I don't think that's the way leftist causes work. I think that you would have to see the world as there is an oppressed class and there is an oppressor class, and I'm fighting for that class. And they generally don't walk away from that stuff. So
I'm happy. It's a good thing that the men's rights movement is generally politically neutral. Like, they only address politics if it's specifically relevant to men's issues. And that I always maintain that that's how it should stay, because as we see, the side effect of this, the civil rights movement was an independent group until, once John F. Kennedy started signing the civil rights bill, they started, and it's like they're almost beholden to the left. You said you have civil rights activists sitting there celebrating Joe Biden presidency or Hillary Clinton. And as I've written an article about Joe Biden, his long history of anti-black policies, but the civil rights movement
and anti-male.
Anti-male policies.
In particular, anti-male, actually, but
yes, the Violence Against Women Act he's nearly the king of incarceration, which is what a lot of things that the civil rights movement has argued against for a long time. And you have those people out there celebrating, Joe Biden's campaigns and the Hillary Clinton campaigns, even though they're big portions of that. And it's because they're beholden to the left. They have to promote whatever goes, and that's why I don't want the men's rights movement to ever go down that route where we have to promote something even if it's against our own interests.
I 100% agree. I always say that the men's movement, like men's issues as a topic, should not be partisan. It shouldn't be. However, that being said, I think the left makes it a partisan issue because they force us into this. This is why they always call us, right-wing, conservatives, far-right, alt-right, etc. They're trying to position us in on the chessboard. They're trying to say this is where they sit. And I think that ultimately it's just about what are my values, what are my principles. And if you believe that puts me in the right, then I guess that's where I am. But I'm not making this into a partisan issue because it shouldn't be.
I mean, to be honest, most of the MRAs I talk to are somewhere on the libertarian kind of spectrum, and have left policy, sort of, agree with the left in some ways, in some policies, agree with the right in some ways, in some policies. But, of the left, the establishment left seems to be handing men's rights, equality, compassion for men to the right. Which strikes me as bizarre, but if that's what they're going to do, then that's who we're going to have to vote for.
Well, I think that they think of it in a tactical way because you see they have in their head the right is evil. So if we make the men's men's movement into a right-wing thing, then we'll think of them as evil. But, you know, I got to go back to what I was saying in the beginning when you asked me like what I've been up to on the fireside chat. I invite left-wingers, I invite right-wingers, I invite centrists on my show. And the right-wingers consistently come on. And I think that they are more and more open to these ideas, even if their solutions might be a little different. Like Jesse Lee Peterson comes at this from a religious angle because he's a reverend and he's super conservative, but he does acknowledge men's issues exist. And so he is willing to talk to me about them. You know, I'm with you. I tend to be very libertarian, and I'm really against authority. And this is why I believe that, you know, men's issues is, if you look at the issues and what the possible solutions are for them, most of them actually involve men being free from the government, not like served by the government. And I think that that's another one of the reasons why feminists hate us too, because if we worked with them, they would simply use it as a means to co-opt the movement. I mean, here's something kind of scary. So Dr. Warren Farrell has been pitching a White House Council for Men and Boys for some time, and he's been trying to get this started, and he wanted to work with the presidency to do so. This is technically a top-down solution. He wants to use, you know, the government to solve a problem for men. And during the Democratic primary debates, when we were still trying to figure out who the Democratic nominee was going to be, Warren Farrell interviewed several Democratic candidates: Cory Booker, Andrew Yang, you know, Beto O'Rourke, the list goes on, right? At the time when he spoke to them, they were excited for the project. Oh, this sounds good. You know, let's talk later. Yes, I really care about men and boys. And he would say, here's my book, The Boy Crisis, etc. You know, but when he followed up later on, they said, I'm sorry, we can't help you, because if we did, then we might lose the feminist vote and the single mother vote. So it wouldn't be in their best interest. Meanwhile, it looks like the Trump administration, without him asking, reached out to him themselves and said, let's talk about what it is you have in mind. Beyond that, the Trump administration, again, without being asked, reached out to, they started a White House Council for Black men and boys. I'm not sure if it's connected or if it's just like its own thing, but they involved Larry Elder, who is a pretty well-known like conservative commentator, to sort of help with the issue. So ultimately, if our goal is to get people, no matter where they are politically, to listen to our arguments and perhaps provide some help, then I don't care if they come from the right. I don't care. Like, I just want people, right, to help us out. And if we have a difference in philosophical approach, like if they try to come at this from like a tradcon approach, like men need to serve women, blah, 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 well, we can talk about that. We can hash that out. We can, we can have a conversation and see where we land on that. But here's the kind of scary part. Because he decided to do this top-down approach and it looks like something is happening, I have a fear. If Joe Biden is made president, he is either going to dissolve this whole thing, or worse, he's going to turn it into a feminist project. And if it becomes a feminist project that becomes a White House Council on Men and Boys, they will completely alter the narrative and make it all about toxic masculinity and patriarchy theory and all of these other structures, and it ultimately result in more problems. And this is exactly what they want, because then they can say, oh, looks like we need more money. The patriarchy is worse than ever. So this is kind of the reason why the top-down approach, while it can have some utility, I think it's dangerous, because as soon as the administration changes, and this doesn't matter what country you're in, then, the status quo changes. All of a sudden, you could lose all the work that you've done.
Yeah. Unless you've gone from the grassroots with people. Sorry, go on, X-man.
Oh no, I was just gonna address, like, I find it very like shocking, like how simple talk of men's issues, like completely like shook up the entire political spectrum. You know, it always had like this love-hate relationship with the rights addressed on men's issues, because there's some people who genuinely just want to talk about it, and then there's other people who are using it because they just think that'll help with their war against the left. Or some people who are just reactionary. You know, there's a lot of right wingers who literally start these it's okay to be white campaigns because they hate the idea that black movements exist. And they think the men's rights movement is going to help with that too, you know. But they think it's just a reactionary situation. They think that helps their cause. But there's also right wingers who actually do address men's issues, and you know, so it's kind of weird, you know. It's like the left and the right both have areas where like their philosophy could actually address men's issues, and they always end up either addressing it from the wrong way or just not addressing it at all. You know, it's just weird how this whole talk about men's issues really shook the political spectrum. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth was going to say something.
I was just going to jump in and say, you know, the only way we can prevent the systems changing radically when new kind of, you know, officials are elected is to ensure that the general public will absolutely not tolerate, you know, the kind of misandry, and it's the grassroots thing.
You have to move the Overton window. So you have to basically change what people consider normal and how we treat men. And this is another catch. The people who are best at moving the Overton window are women. And like, because they have power in the social. They control the social in a large way, right? Now, men can inspire women. And I think that there is like a symbiotic relationship there. Like a man can sort of demonstrate, you know, I don't know, like something that women can say, oh, I want to see that in more men. But ultimately, like, women are the ones that sort of drive, I think, the Overton window.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's an interesting point. And I would say that, you know, if you look back in time and now in the men's human rights movement, and you go, who are the best thinkers? Well, there might be a woman or two, but there's like 10 men. There's like, you know, for every 1 or 2 women. The people who are really thinking outside the box are generally men. But, you know, it does take women going, yeah, that's okay. You can think that.
You got it. Exactly. It does. And then they repeat it, or they share it, they teach it, and they pass that on. And then other women say, oh, because, you know, there's the thing about women is that men take that initial risk to say, here's an idea that like no one's going to like. And most people, not just women, will say, ugh, that's an idea I don't like. But then a couple of women say, actually, I like that. And then those women start talking to each other, and then other women who may have actually liked it but didn't have the courage to say that they did feel emboldened to come forward and say that they do, and then things start to snowball from there. You know, so I do think, and especially in an age of social media, which I often say social media is massively multiplayer online video games for women. Because it is where they score their points, it's where they gain experience, it's where they interact with the world, and it's where they have the most fun. In particular, social media I'm talking about. So Twitter, Facebook, you know, Instagram, and they share ideas and they start, you know, petitions and movements. I mean, when Johnny Depp was accused by Amber Heard of being a wife beater, and the Sun printed that horrible article about him, the people who came out in droves to defend him were, of course, women, because they loved Johnny Depp. And so they started a whole hashtag, I stand with Johnny Depp, or something like that. And, you know, it created a movement online. And so, like, to understand that, and I think, in fact, that despite how that turns out, there is a whole bunch of women that have just been red-pilled a little bit about domestic abuse, and they will remember what happened, and that will come up again in the future. But I believe at the end of the day, men take that initial risk by and large. I mean, I got red pilled by Karen, so there are exceptions.
Yeah, I would say, you know, Karen and Alison have got brains that, you know, they can think on a sort of higher, wider level.
Absolutely.
But they're rare, you know. And how many men of that standard are there in the men's?
Well, that's just the thing. It's funny because it feeds into itself.
Talent in any way, but you know.
It feeds into it. It feeds back into itself because when, you know, some of these MRA guys put these stuff out there, Karen and Allison may have experienced that. Then they put their ideas out there, and then you got a whole bunch of men saying, there's a woman and she's speaking out for me. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden they realize that there are women who care about them. And this is why I said you move the Overton window when women speak up, because men who are generally told that they don't have problems and they're not allowed to talk about their problems will just stay silent. But when they see a bunch of women say, I acknowledge that you have your own unique experiences and your own unique problems, and here they are, then men will say, wow, there are women out here who care about me. And you know, it just does a world of difference. So it's like a cycle, feeds into itself.
Yeah, I noticed that's how a lot of like human rights groups work. Like because if society cared about the human that disadvantaged group, they wouldn't be giving them the disadvantages in the first place, right? Because of course they don't care if men are speaking out about a disadvantage. Because if they care, why would they be treating you like that to begin with? You know,
right.
You know, so you talking about it's like, okay, well, I know that. That's why I'm doing this to you, because I don't care about your feelings or your pain. And so then you need women to also to pop up and, you know, bring this up, and then society starts being a little more like open-minded to the idea, you know, because now here's a group of people we actually care about talking about the situation, you know. So if somebody,
really interesting. You know, if you want to, I know that we've been going for a while. If you want to see an interesting phenomenon, look up videos of protests and riots where there are speakers. It doesn't matter if they're Black Lives Matter, Antifa, or what, and take account of how many of the people leading these protests, riots, and marches are women. And you'll be surprised at how many are women in those instances. And that just sort of demonstrates how much power women have.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I wish it could go on longer, but we're limited. So I'd just like to say cheers to the men and women working towards the planned obsolescence of the men's human rights movement, and thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.